I would like to say welcome again to the webinar, Boosting Academic Success, Improve Study Strategies, and Enhance Comprehension in Homeschool and Remote Teaching Environments with Dr. Cecil Reynolds. This is a 90-minute webinar. You are in listen-only mode, which is necessary for a webinar of this size. Having said that, we very much want to hear from you. You'll notice there is a chat function, so feel free to post comments and keep a lookout for resources related to this webinar. There's also a Q&A function, question and answer. Please type your questions here that you would like Dr. Reynolds to answer during the Q&A period at the end of the webinar. Again, the chat box is for housekeeping types of items, and the Q&A is for questions that are directly for Dr. Reynolds. The webinar will be recorded and emailed to you in the days following the webinar. We will also be providing you with a slide deck for reference. Please feel free to share these resources with other professionals. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce, I do want to, if you can shift to the next slide, Dr. Reynolds. This webinar is sponsored by WPS, and WPS has been a publisher for over 75 years. And we're the leading independent publisher. If you'd like more information about our products, you can go to wpspublish.com. Next slide. So I'm here today to introduce Dr. Cecil Reynolds. He is a professor emeritus and distinguished research scholar at Texas A&M University. He earned his doctorate from University of Georgia. And during his long career as an educator, clinician, and researcher, he has developed many highly regarded psychological tests, authored more than 300 scholarly papers, and written or edited more than 50 books, including the Handbook of School Psychology, the Encyclopedia of Special Education, the Energetic Brain, and the Handbook of Clinical Child Neuropsychology. He has also been nationally recognized and received numerous awards. For the man who needs no introduction, I say this all the time, Dr. Cecil Reynolds.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Stephanie. And just a quick word about WPS. I have had a very, very lengthy relationship with them, and I'm actually very grateful to them for being willing to sponsor these webinars and allow me to speak to you guys about things that are near and dear to me in terms of my professional role. And just as an aside, my 48th commercially published test will be released in the next week. But WPS published my very first test way back that I developed in 1978. So that's how far back I go with WPS, and have always enjoyed working with these guys. So they just do a great job. So thank you to WPS for sponsoring this today and pulling these people together and all the tech support as well. So today we are going to be talking about something that, as I said, is very close to me. In fact, it's one of my very favorite, if not the favorite things to talk about, which is enhancing or teaching children how to learn. How to study, how to learn, how to acquire information better. And that's something that we don't teach a lot in the schools. And we know from research now that is more than 50 years old, both in educational psychology, school psychology, related areas, particularly now what has become known as cognitive science, has all demonstrated repeatedly that students who engage in strategic learning and strategic test taking perform at higher levels academically than students who do not do that. And we'll be defining these terms later. I'm going to talk about what strategies are and strategic learning and how we approach this, both from the assessment side and from the, okay, what do we do about it side? And this is particularly critical now when students are engaging in a lot more virtual learning, part-time at home, part-time at school, homeschooling is becoming more prevalent, aside from even virtual learning with their teachers. So children have to be able to function with greater independence. And we know that their academic achievement levels can be improved significantly by improving the study skills, learning, reading comprehension strategies they employ, test taking, and related strategies at all ages. And the research is highly consistent. In fact, it's so consistent, I have never been able to find one contradictory study that doesn't say that this is effective with students at all ages and with both regular education and special education. So what I'm going to be talking about today applies to everyone who is a learner, anybody who's trying to learn anything. And, you know, the strategies that people use even apply to you, the folks who are here today. But you know, you're probably pretty good at this. You have good study skills, you have good learning strategies, or you would not have gotten to where you are. And sometimes we assume that kids will figure this out, that they will pick up these strategies. They'll know how to study, they'll know how to learn, they'll know how to apply strategies to comprehend what they read. They'll figure out how to take tests so that they can demonstrate their knowledge and skills accurately. But it turns out that the students who do figure that out are in a minority. Most kids don't just figure that out on their own, at least they don't figure out effective ways of doing that. And so knowing how to study, learn, and enhance their comprehension skills is critical. And it's even more critical in the homeschool and this remote virtual teaching environment that so many of them are experiencing now. The better your study skills, the better your learning strategies, the more you have, the more you use those that are effective, the more you can apply comprehension strategies to when you read, the more you can benefit from independent learning, independent organization, just being able to do things on your own. And one of the things that is evident to all of us who are involved in this now, and I bet you it's evident to every single person listening to me on this webinar, there is less supervision of learning now, there's less oversight, and there's less direction about what to do with their time. So to the extent that we can teach kids these skills now, it's always been true that they would benefit from them, but now it's even more critical. So I'm going to talk some about the scientific outcomes, which I've really done already to some extent, about learning skill development, and I'm going to talk about assessing the skills of individual students, because we have a means of evaluating their knowledge and application of learning and study skills and strategies. But in the second half of this, I'm going to spend our time demonstrating techniques for remediating measured deficiencies in learning and study skills and comprehension and other critical skills, for example, like strategic listening. I'm going to present those and talk about specific resources for developing additional methods for improving students' characteristics in these areas. And to make sure that you understand, I am an author of some of these materials. I'm the author of the School Motivation and Learning Strategies Inventory, which is the best assessment device out there, and I stand by the objectivity of that, by the way, even though it's my baby, for assessing the presence of the knowledge and application of these skills in school-age individuals. But also, we have very specific teaching skills that we want to promote, and teaching content. And we have scripted lesson plans for instructing kids in this, and a lot of other support materials for you so you can help develop this. And I am an author on those as well, just so you know that. But the enhancement of these needed skill areas, I will be talking about today as a team effort. It really does take a team. And that team should include people like school psychologists and the instructional staff, teachers, teacher aides, other support staff, counselors can help with this. Speech and language can help with this in many areas. There are lots of support staff in schools who can be engaged with this and instructing kids in how to do this. And this team should include the parents or other caregivers who are in the home. But every skill I'm going to talk about today is a skill that a parent can teach. And the materials that we have are accessible to parents. The materials for engaging in this teaching and instruction and skill development with kids are level A. That means anybody can purchase them. They're not restricted. They're not the testing materials, which are restricted. But the instructional materials can be used by anybody. They're designed specifically for teachers and teacher aides. But what we have found is that parents can pick this up and also use it very easily because all of the material is scripted. And I will show you examples of that in the second half of my talk today. It turns out that despite 50 plus years of supportive science, as a general rule, and obviously there are exceptions to this, but as a general rule, we are not teaching children strategic learning in the public schools in the United States. There are actual studies of this. One of the ones I particularly like was the ACT curriculum survey because it's probably the most comprehensive look at school curriculum out there. And what they said is that reading instruction in particular does not prepare students for college level reading assignments, for example. That reading strategies are not being taught. And it turns out that once folks leave the public schools, that they need to be placed in remedial reading programs, many of them, where reading strategies are taught, and that greatly improves their comprehension skills. So we're not teaching this in the schools. If we do not teach learning and study strategies, most students will not develop effective strategies. Many will not develop strategies at all. And many of those who do will not engage in effective strategies. But every single one of these are skills that can be taught. And it turns out that the research tells us that minority and lower SES students are less likely to develop these skills without direct instruction. If you don't teach it to them, they are less likely to develop them. And we do know that these skills have always been critical to success in learning. These skills, as I've been emphasizing already and will do again, are even more critical as learning becomes more self-driven, which is what happens in virtual and homeschool environments. Learning is more self-driven, it's more independent, and there is less structured supervision. And that is so common in the virtual learning environment. Once they click out of that, they have to engage on their own. We also know that teaching these skills levels the playing field educationally without bringing down high-achieving children. It brings up the lower end of the achievement spectrum. And we know that minority and lower SES students are disproportionately represented in the group of children with below average academic skills. That's often referred to as the achievement gap. We can lessen that achievement gap by emphasizing and teaching directly how to study, how to learn, how to engage with the material so they come away with a higher level of academic achievement. So it has a lot of benefits. Knowing how to study and learn also enhances student motivation. We see that. If you're good at something, you're more likely to do it. Teaching students how to study and learn produces empowered learning. And these students enjoy higher academic achievement levels and a wider array of lifetime opportunities. In fact, I'm sure you've heard this old rubric. If you give a hungry man a fish, he eats for a day. If you teach a hungry man to fish, he sits in a boat and drinks beer and sleeps all day. No, wait a minute, that's not how it goes. I guess that's just in Texas. But if you teach someone to fish, they eat for a lifetime. If you teach someone how to study and learn, they become a more effective learner for the rest of their life. When they become employed, when they have to change jobs, when they have to update their skills in their job as adults, if they have been taught how to study and how to learn, they will be more successful in all of those learning environments throughout their lifetime. I'm not the only one saying this. These are quotes from other people who have been reviewing this literature for many years as well. Knowing how to learn, though, for you, the bottom line is that knowing how to learn improves academic performance. Knowing how to study improves and fosters independent learning. And that is a critical link to remote/virtual learning and homeschooling, and why we should emphasize this even more now than I think we should emphasize it in ordinary times. And I think we ought to emphasize it then. But if you think through the current learning environment, I think you'll understand how critical it is to improve and foster independent learning that is effective. Not just spending time with their materials, spending effective time. We can teach comprehension skills, and those skills improve all aspects of learning and create even more opportunities for independent learning, in addition to increasing motivation to learn on their own. Students who engage in strategic learning and test taking perform at higher academic levels than those who not. That is one of the few undisputed findings in all of the education sciences. If you improve the study skills, learning strategies, reading comprehension, and test taking behavior of students, their academic achievement will also improve. It's true, as I've said earlier, at all grade levels with both regular and special education students. At-home learning is now making more demands on the individual student's skill in organizing their materials, studying, comprehending, engaging in strategic listening in that virtual environment, and self-motivating. And remember, if you know how to do something, you're more likely to do it. It takes a team. School psychologists, other assessment personnel, other support staff can assess or supervise assessment of students' current skills in knowing how to learn, how to study, and how to comprehend. They can then coordinate with teachers and parents and other support staff, instructional support staff in particular, and help provide access to these materials. Now, we don't have to assess all these kids. we can take this as a general approach to all children, and all children will benefit. But we can also assess individual children or groups of children to see if we need to target teaching of these skills with specific kids. So we can handle this with or without assessment. I like being able to target what we want to teach to groups or individuals. But we know that classes will benefit from this as well. Teachers and aides can conduct the assessments as well, particularly if this is coordinated with a school psychologist. They can tailor lessons to teach study and learning skills, and they can assist parents in following up and in teaching this at home, and provide direct access to teaching materials to parents, because parents are fully capable of teaching their kids how to do this in the presence of scripted lesson plans. And that's what we have for you. Parents can also reinforce these skills at home using these scripted lessons. So if the teachers are teaching this, if teacher aides are teaching this with individual students, the parents can listen in, and they can reinforce how to use these skills and review this with their students at home as well. The School Motivation and Learning Strategies Inventory and the SFAS, which is our set of instructional materials, that is Strategies for Academic Success, that's our teaching handbook, target these 10 primary constructs. Our strength areas that we want to improve in kids are study strategies, writing and research skills, reading comprehension strategies, note-taking and listening skills, enhancing time management, increasing their organizational techniques, and improving their test-taking strategies. Then there are 3 liability areas that we talk about and have very specific methods for intervention in all of these areas. One is test anxiety, and I'll be addressing that in a little more detail today as well, because in these times of virtual and remote learning, as well as the societal anxiety that is permeating everything we do right now, and I think not just for the kids, but for you too, I'm anticipating an increase in test anxiety among kids. So we want to know how to deal with that. Also, academic attention and concentration, which is different from strategic listening. We have specific materials to address that as well. And we have specific materials and scripted lessons for enhancing academic motivation. So we will address all of these areas, both from an assessment standpoint and from an instructional standpoint with these materials. Now, I can't go through and teach you how to teach all of these areas today. That is quite a bit more time consuming. But I'm going to introduce you to these materials and demonstrate them as we go. But each area is important. And every one of these constructs is well established in educational psychology and the general education science literature. It's been demonstrated in literally hundreds of research spanning actually more than 5 decades for every one of these constructs to be related to academic and educational success. Now, before we go further, I've been using this term and tossing it around, learning strategy, without defining that. Let's do that. First of all, a learning strategy is not what has become known as learning style. This is completely different. They are totally unrelated. Learning styles are very controversial. I'm not going to take sides on it today. I will at another time, or if you want to email me later and ask me what I think of learning styles, I'll tell you. But you're familiar with the concept of learning styles. We talk about sometimes visual learners, auditory learners, even tactile learners, whatever they are. And I kind of thought that was teenage boys, but this is not learning styles. Learning styles are passive with a learner. And if you take the approach of employing learning styles as a way of adapting instruction, what they would tell you, folks who push learning style instruction, is that you need to modify the way you present the material to suit the learning style of the student. That makes the student still passive, a passive recipient of the information. That is not what learning strategies are at all. Learning strategies are defined instead as the purposeful behaviors of the learner that are intended to facilitate the acquisition and processing of information. So this is something, a learning strategy is an active learner, a student who is engaged in the application of strategic study, strategic learning, strategic listening. All of these strategies is active in the process of learning. And there is also 100 years of research that says if you are active in your interaction with the learning materials, your retention rate goes up dramatically. It easily doubles and often triples if you are actively engaged in the learning. And by actively engaged, I mean doing something other than sitting there being a receptacle for knowledge that someone is passing along to you. That requires you to know and apply effective strategy. So these are purposeful behaviors that kids engage in. And as an example, and I use reading as an example often in this because reading is critical to learning, particularly independent learning. Michael Presley, who's probably the greatest reading researcher of our generation, wrote in the last paper that he published before he died, unfortunately prematurely in 2009, that it should come as no surprise that we are frustrated with the overattention to sound, letter, and word level processing that characterizes instruction for struggling readers, given the evidence that progress often boils down to a little progress in learning how to sound out words and only a small improvement in comprehension. He is a great advocate of teaching comprehension strategies to students. He goes on to tell us in that last paper that when skilled readers read, they are very active before, during, and after reading in the service of getting meaning from text. And when I talk about reading comprehension strategies later in this talk, I'll tell you how they are active before they read. Passive listening to word calling in our heads does not promote comprehension. We have to manipulate information in order to understand it. And this really requires the use of a strategy. And there are clear and effective reading comprehension strategies that we assess with the School Motivation and Learning Strategies Inventory, and for which we have scripted lesson plans and related teaching materials to pass on to students in Strategies for Academic Success. Again, our intervention materials. So we want to teach kids to be actively engaged. So let's talk briefly about how we assess learning and study strategies before we move on to the intervention piece. The School Motivation and Learning Strategies Inventory, which we refer to, our acronym for that is the SMALSI, is the primary assessment device that we've created to allow you to evaluate these students. assessing learning and study strategies is not a new idea. Um, the LASI, the Learning and Study Strategies Inventory, was the first major instrument in this domain, but it was designed specifically to be used with college students. And it was developed by a person who was a dear friend of mine and an absolutely brilliant, brilliant cognitive scientist, Claire Weinstein. And Claire uh, was an amazing scientist, but also an incredible teacher, who founded the IBM Cognitive Science think tank, by the way. And those of you who have any kind of academic affiliation will appreciate what I'm about to say about her. Her very first academic job when she decided to leave private industry was as a tenured full professor at the University of Texas, a very, very large, very demanding school for scholarship. And that speaks volumes to Claire's respect as a scientist at that point in her career. And she, though, was uncertain whether or not it was even possible to assess this well with elementary and beginning high school students. She did eventually adapt her college level materials to grades 11 and 12, but we were able to take this down to age 8 and get good, solid, reliable, and comprehensive assessment. So we can evaluate the kids. And this is available if you want to do the assessment, um, which obviously I encourage. It's available now for online remote assessment. It's also available for one-on-one in-person assessment with kids, but it can also be done in groups. So um, I'd encourage you to check this out. But it's not a requirement that you assess these kids before you intervene and teach them these skills. But you can be more efficient and more targeted in how you approach this if you do the assessment. So the School Motivation Learning Strategies Inventory is a standardized self-report for ages 8 to 19 years in 2 forms for elementary and high school students. There is also a college version, if there's anyone on here who works with college students. The college form actually is used quite a bit with NCAA scholarship athletes. Several of the major NCAA programs use the college version of the SMALSI to assess all of their scholarship athletes every year. And then they use our strategies for academic success instructional materials to teach them in areas where they're weak, because many students coming into college still have not developed these skills. The child form is from ages 8 to 12. There's a teen form for ages 13 through 19. And then the college form is from 18 to 25. It's designed to assess multiple constructs that I've been talking about related to learning strategies, academic motivation, test taking strategies, test anxiety, other things that we'll define for you here momentarily. Again, it's available for online, remote administration, scoring, and reporting, as well as individual and group assessment. So it can be administered by teachers, teacher aides, school psychologists, counselors, speech and learning pathologists, anybody. As long as you consult with someone, I prefer school psychologists, but anyone who has training in assessment in this area within the school district. It can be given individually, um, groups large or small. Most students will complete it in 20 to 30 minutes if they read at a grade level of 3.5 or higher. Since it does not ask personality type questions, it's okay to read this to students who can't read at that level. And that actually adds very, very little to the administration time, a minute to 2 minutes at most. It yields a profile of T-scores, and as you know, T-scores have a mean of 50 and standard deviation of 10, from which strengths and weaknesses in the 13 areas that I mentioned can be determined and targeted for teaching if necessary. Computer scoring or hand scoring. And by the way, if you're still hand scoring a lot of psychological tests out there, if you're hand scoring the SMALSI or you're hand scoring a BASC, I can tell you that they have medication for that. So switch to computer scoring. It is so much easier, faster, and will save your sanity, particularly in these busy times. Who can use it? School and related psychologists, school counselors, LPCs, SOP, anybody who has training, educational diagnosticians, people who are trained to do testing. With the assistance of any of these folks, I am fine with learning disability specialists and special education teachers with assessment training doing it, regular education teachers even who've had a course in classroom assessment or test and measurements. If you will consult with assessment personnel in your district, then I'm fine with you using this assessment. I'd like you to consult with them also on the interpretation because we don't want to overinterpret results. So let's look at the scales and their definitions very quickly. There is as I said, we have strength scales and liability scales. The strength scales start with study strategies. This assesses, for example, how to select important information, how to relate new to previously learned information, and how to invoke memory strategies for encoding material so that you have a much higher level of retention. In fact, it evaluates many other study strategies, but I will relate to you that relating new to previously learned material is probably the single most effective learning strategy we know of. And learning strategies have been studied and studied and studied. And there is nothing more effective than teaching children how to make associations between something they're trying to learn and something they already know. And J. McVicker Hunt wrote about this decades ago as the problem of the match and mismatch in learning. If there is no overlap between what you're trying to learn and what you already know, very little learning occurs. If there's too much overlap, very little learning occurs. So we want to hit that sweet spot and be able to relate novel information to things we already know. And there are clear strategies for how to do that teachers can teach and model in their classroom. The next scale is note-taking and listening skills. And this is really strategic listening when I talk about listening skills. How to determine what's important when you're taking notes, how to organize them, how to be efficient, and how to listen strategically. And I'm going to show you some examples of what constitutes strategic listening a little later and how we teach that. Reading comprehension strategies, things like previewing, monitoring, reviewing text, self-testing, summarizing, all the things that the National Institute for Literacy says have scientific support as strategies to improve your ability to comprehend what you read. We assess writing and research skills, researching topics in a variety of ways, how to organize your writing projects, and how to self-monitor and self-check. And this is up to date, by the way. There are no questions in here, for example, about how to use the Dewey Decimal System. It is a modern, up-to-date assessment of how we do research. Test-taking strategies. We include an assessment of that because it's important to level the playing field in test-taking. Some students develop skills and know how to take tests, Just as an example, my wife is a school psychologist, and our son knows a lot about how to take tests, and he's extremely good at it. And for example, when I saw his SAT scores, I had to tell him, "You're not that smart. You're just really good at this." Um, because having a test developer and a school psychologist as parents makes you really good at this. Because most kids don't have these skills, but some do. So the kids who don't have them, we want to teach it to them to level the playing field and get more accurate assessment and make sure that kids are able to demonstrate accurately what they know. Organizational techniques. We assess their ability to organize class and study materials and structure assignments, including homework and other independent learning projects. Time management. The effective use of time to complete their assignments and understand how to budget time that they need for different academic tasks. All of this is critical. On the child version, by the way, time management and organizational techniques are combined into a single scale. For the adolescent version, starting at age 13, time management and organization broke out clearly in the factor analytic data as separate constructs. You can be well organized and still waste a lot of time, or you can manage your time well and still be very disorganized. But for young kids, organization and time management go hand in hand. They can't be separated well. But by the time you're about 13 or 14, you can clearly engage in one and not the other. The liability subscales, low academic motivation. It's important to know if students are interested in learning. Test anxiety, you're familiar with. So do they experience debilitating symptoms of anxiety, which lowers your performance on tests due to excessive worry? Attention and concentration difficulties that is academic in nature. Can you attend accurately to lectures and other academic tasks? Can you monitor and adjust your attention? Can you concentrate and avoid distractions in an academic environment? So what we want to do with the SMALSI is identify students who lack or have underdeveloped learning and study skills so we can teach them how to be more effective, strategic learners who can demonstrate their knowledge and skills accurately in all learning environments. And as you know now from your experiences in homeschooling and virtual environments, the develop and use of skills like this has to be even more critical as the supervision of learning declines in both time and intensity. So we like to use the assessment device to screen kids in regular education to identify group weaknesses in an entire classroom, or we can identify individual students with a lack or poorly developed strategies for learning. If we find a group weakness, for example, in a classroom where maybe we find that on average, students in Ms. Smith's class are a half a standard deviation, say, behind on average other students in the same grade in the development of reading comprehension skills, then it's a very good use of the teacher's time to teach those comprehension strategies to the entire class. On the other hand, suppose we find there are only 4 students in there who have serious weaknesses in the development of their comprehension strategies. Then we can target those individual students and have support staff and parents work with them to teach them those necessary strategies. It's very useful in pre-referral. Sometimes kids, if we just teach them how to learn, don't need to go to special ed. They can improve their learning. Certainly not all, or maybe even most. But there are a significant number of kids that if we just teach them how to learn, they will. This can be done. We can assess their skill development in these areas in homeschool and remote. and virtual teaching environments as well. All of this is even more relevant to independent, less structured, less supervised learning. It's also useful in working with students who have disabilities. In particular, students diagnosed with learning disabilities, emotional disturbance, ADHD, and traumatic brain injury. And there is another recorded webinar if you're interested in more about how to use it with them that probably Stephanie or someone at WPS can direct you to, where I go into more detail about how to use the assessment and how to use it also with these kids in particular. So just a quick word on the psychometrics. The SMALSI standardized on about 3,000 public and private school students. The reliability data reported in the manual shows very good reliability of the scores, very acceptable for this. We have a lot of validity data showing these scores predict academic outcomes. And we have detailed data on all of this in the professional manual. I'm not going to review that with you today because we want to move on to intervention. And remember, every skill I talked about, every one of those scale definitions reflects a skill that can be learned. It's a skill, but they have to be taught, and they are very teachable. And too often we just assume students are going to figure this out. But we want to help solve some of these problems in general education before they become problems in special education. With the homeschooler and remote learner, we also know that having high-level study skills and learning strategies gives them more confidence. And as you know, kids are increasingly anxious about their ability to learn in this environment. And they're even fearful of going back to the regular classroom and being behind other kids. And all the kids have some fear of that. So we can deal with that by being sure that their learning and study skills have made them more capable and successful independent learners. That's a critical requirement for success in the virtual environment. It's also, remember, self-motivating. If you know how to learn, if you know how to study, if you have the skills, you're more likely to do it. Think about your own life. Which are you more likely to engage in? Something you're good at, where you see success as a result of your behavior, or something you're really horrible at, where you fail over and over? Which are you more likely to do? It also, if you have these skills, it is known to increase time on task spent learning. That is a very, very important variable. The research tells us that if you could only pick one thing, one variable to predict academic learning, the single best predictor is not IQ, it's not processing skills, it's not auditory processing, it's not memory, it's not any of those things. The one best predictor, if I restricted you to one, is time on task spent learning. And if you have the skills, you will spend more time engaged in learning. Everybody can benefit, regardless of their ability level. They benefit academically from becoming strategic in their learning. And the routine teaching of this provides inoculation from academic deficiencies. It is both an intervention and prevention. It's a unique characteristic of having strategic abilities that it prevents learning problems, but it is also an intervention for students who have learning problems. It's a basic building block of learning. And so the acquisition of strategies is nothing short of essential to becoming an effective self-regulated learner. And remember that there are better interventions in global instruction in one approach. if kids are having trouble with reading comprehension, um, we need to engage in other methods of teaching. And there are some questions that can be hard to answer about some methods of teaching, and I'll just leave that question there with you for you to figure out. Strategy instruction in special education has a very important role to play, particularly in Tier 1 and Tier 2 interventions in the general classroom. And then we can do even more specific, more intense interventions in special education in Tier 3. You can review individual item content as well and focus with great precision with individual kids, if you will, on what strategies to teach. In RTI models, we know that strategy instruction increases effect size, particularly in reading. Very good study that shows that RTI approaches enhance reading, but if you include instruction in reading comprehension strategies, the effect sizes are much larger. And I don't want to exclude fluency. Fluency is important. Fluency is a necessary but insufficient condition for comprehension. But I do want to emphasize comprehension. This particular reading test I found on the Highway Department's website is one where you can see that both reading speed and reading comprehension is critical to success. So how we teach strategies, we recommend our intervention manual. As I said, I think you'll find this handbook to be very useful. It's called Strategies for Academic Success. It's an instructional handbook for teaching K through 12 students how to study, how to learn, how to take tests, how to be successful. It's available electronically. It's also available in hard copy. This intervention manual has 3 sections, an introduction to learning strategies, where we teach you about that, and chapter 2, where I review the research evidence from the education sciences. That's probably the chapter that most people skip. But I like you to be able to know about and have access to the science. Section 2 is by far the largest section and the bulk of the handbook. There are 7 chapters there, 1 for each SMALSI strength scale. So as an example, for a chapter headings outline in chapter 3, how to teach study strategies, we'd review the link between the assessment and study strategies, which is not required to do this. But then we review what do the education sciences say are the best study strategies to teach. Then we review how to teach them. And then we have scripted lessons for teaching each of those strategies. For example, teaching students to improve their concentration when studying, teaching them how to improve memorization, teaching them how to develop associations with prior learning, teaching them how to use self-taught, teaching them to use concept maps. These are critical. How to use multiple sources of information. So we have detailed scripted lessons for each and every one of these areas. And then a summary at the end of each chapter. The 3rd section of this handbook details strategies for overcoming the 3 areas of academic liabilities that I talked about earlier. Enhancing low academic motivation. How do we do that? As an example of the headings, we discuss the assessment of academic motivation and its length. Then what are the best academic motivation strategies? How do you teach academic motivation? Because motivation is something you can teach. Every athletic coach in the world has to teach motivation. Teaching students to set goals and increase self-determinism. Teaching them about choice and preference. Teaching students about participation and involvement. teaching them to understand situational motivation and the impact of the environment around them, as well as how to arrange their learning environment so that that environment is supportive and motivating. And that's important. Teaching them how to unlearn the history of failure, because failure decreases motivation, and we want to set them up for success. And we can teach students how to set themselves up to be more successful, which is motivating. We have two helpful appendices as part of this handbook. We have a listing of vetted websites that have supplemental information on how to improve learning and study strategies, and have other materials for you. And in Appendix B, we have 79 reproducible figures and worksheets that we give you permission to copy and distribute with students, and you can provide all of this free to parents for use at home. And teachers, anyone that you want to use this. If you have purchased the handbook, you can reproduce these figures at will and distribute them for free. You have our permission, and it says so in the handbook. So Strategies for Academic Success has scripted, detailed lessons for teaching every strategy in the following list of scientifically supported learning and study strategies. And every one of these, and I want to stress this, were chosen based on their scientific support as effective in improvement of learning and test taking. All of these are evidence-based interventions. So I'm not going to read you the titles of all these, but I want to give you a chance, and you'll have the handout. You'll see these are all the strategies that we have detailed scripted lessons for teaching. So you'll see that in every area we have at least 4 and typically more strategies that you can teach. For example, for listening strategy, how to be prepared to listen, how to be an active listener, how to listen for and identify teacher cues that draw you into what is being emphasized, and then how to put it all together. TQLR as an acrostic. Tune in, question, listen, and review. So all of these have that in terms of time management, test anxiety, all the test-taking strategies that we have to teach students, all of which are evidence-based. Reading comprehension strategies, academic motivation strategies, all with detailed scripted lesson plans. So let's look at some examples of these instructional approaches. According to research summarized by the National Institute for Literacy, comprehension is the reason for reading. If readers can read the words but do not understand, they are not fully reading. Reading is the comprehension of text and is improved by instruction that helps readers use very specific comprehension strategies. Now remember that strategies, as we define them, are conscious, purposeful plans for accomplishing a goal. They tell us there are 6 strategies that improve text comprehension that have strong scientific support. The following strategies the education sciences say are the ones you should teach to improve comprehension. And in Strategies for Academic Success, we have detailed scripted lessons for how to teach every one of these. How to monitor their comprehension, how to use graphic and semantic organizers, how to generate questions about what they read, how to answer questions about what they read. It's not enough to ask, but you have to answer. And that's important. How to recognize the structure of the material. That is, part of that, as I mentioned, is part of what you do before you read. You ask yourself, why am I reading this? What are my goals for reading this material? and establish the goals for that content, and you will read with greater purpose. How to summarize. Summarizing is a great skill, and it's what I'm going to use as my example of scripting for this momentarily. The most effective strategy, though, for teaching strategies is clear, direct instruction. And I just want to remind you of that. Direct instruction is incredibly effective, and all of our scripted lesson plans are designed around direct instruction. Direct explanation, modeling by the teacher, guided practice, and application. So we will come around to that momentarily. This is a method easily taught to parents to use. Parents can pick up direct instruction very, very quickly. And the detailed scripted lesson plans make it easy for teachers, teacher aides, and parents to teach every single one of those strategies that I showed you earlier. To teach summarizing, which I'm going to use as an example to enhance reading comprehension. We're going to use direct explanation, which is tell me what you want me to learn. Modeling by the teacher, that is, show me how you do it, teacher. Guided practice, do it along with me. Help me summarize, do it with me. And then let me do it on my own and give me feedback. That's the application piece. And then you repeat based on the feedback. You can repeat any or all of these steps. So for summarizing, the direct explanation step would go something like this. And this is the level of detail. This is an exact quote from our handbook for how to teach this. It tells you that you might read the following, but you can adapt it to the child's age and comprehension level. A summary is a short way of telling the most important or most interesting parts of something, so people listening to or reading your summary will understand what you read or saw, even if they do not know all of the details. For example, Susie, what is your favorite television show? So maybe Susie says Smurfs on Saturday morning. I guess that's how old I am. And you allow the student to respond. Maybe Susie says, well, this week Gargamel kidnapped Smurfette, and Papa Smurf and the other Smurfs had to go figure out a way to track her down and rescue her before he threw her in his stew pot. And here's what they did. So you let her explain that, and you say, that's good, that's great, I love that summary. And now we all understand what you liked most about the show last week and what happened. And it only took you a minute or two to tell us, but the show lasted 30 minutes, didn't it? That is a summary. So then maybe we do more examples of that. Johnny, what's your favorite movie? Tell us what happens in the movie. Very good. Now we all know the basic story and most important parts of the movie as you see it, and you told us that in only a minute or two. But the movie lasted over an hour like that. You do this, you repeat this until you're sure that the students understand what constitutes a summary and have seen this, and now they have the direct explanation. And you can do this as long as you need to do it. And there are numerous scripts in there for how to do this with different topics. And you adapt and engage this for K through 12. And like I said earlier, many athletic departments are using these same scripts and adapting them for use with college students, which is very easy to do. You can even adapt them on the fly. All of these short stories are called summaries. A summary is a short way of explaining or telling something that is longer. So I'm not going to continue to read this to you, but I want you to see the examples of scripting that are there and reinforce that we have this level of detail in our handbook for how to teach this to kids. We have all of these lesson plans. Another might be teaching strategic listening, because research indicates that the best strategies to teach to improve listening include those that prepare students for what they'll hear, how to engage them while listening, how to maintain attention, and how to allow them to process the information they're hearing. So we would have in the following sections of the handbook, teaching students how to prepare to listen, how to become an active listener, how to listen for teacher cues, and how to put it all together, how to tune in, question, listen, and review. So we have scripted lessons for this. So good listening begins with preparing yourself for what will be heard. Students likely expect that learning begins with a lecture. In fact, it begins with preparation before and during class. So we explain the whole approach. And then we have the scripted lessons. Today, we're going to talk about listening. Who can tell me the difference between hearing and listening? And you let all the students talk about who want to what the difference is. How many have heard your parents say, "You're not listening to me"? And you were able to respond, "Yes, I am." You said, and you repeat back the words. You heard the words, but you didn't think or act on them until your parents got your attention. In other words, you didn't really process or understand what they had said until you repeated it back. That's the difference between hearing and listening. We are actively processing and seeking to understand. Today, we're going to begin to learn some strategies that will help us listen more effectively. And then we go in to teaching with our scripted lessons how to prepare to listen. So we have this level of detail, and we take students through this. It's step by step by step. For example, the things that were referenced in the last slide that I hit very quickly because of our time constraints, we teach students to ask themselves, why am I listening to this? Am I listening to understand? Am I listening to remember, to evaluate, to be entertained, to support? And then what they should do as an answer to each of those self-questions as they are preparing to listen to something and learn. So we can improve all kinds of study skills too. We have strategies for those. These are the ones where we have scripted direct instruction. So I'm not going to take you through all of these. I just want to show you all the things that we cover. For example, for memorizing, we teach how to use acronyms, how to use acrostics, and wow, I learned, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, in 7th grade, and I still remember that acrostic and apply it to solving math problems. Visualization, we teach rhyme keys, how to use loci, as a means of memorization, how to do chaining. Then we can move on to note-taking and listening skills, how to teach all of these things. We have detailed, scripted lesson plans for all of these. So, for example, here's an illustration of note-taking strategies and all the things we would teach for that. Again, we want to teach all this using direct instruction, how to abbreviate passages, how to abbreviate your own notes. So many strategies, every one of which has scripted lesson plans in great detail. For very advanced learners, we can use advanced direct instruction. The key difference is being that we justify the strategy and we can give students who are advanced more detail about when and where the strategy should be used. Now, I want to address test anxiety very quickly before we take some questions. Test anxiety matters. Here is the famous inverted U related to test anxiety and test performance. As you see, a little bit of test anxiety is good for you, you do better. But at some point, test anxiety really begins to interfere with your ability to take tests. And test takers are even sometimes paranoid about some questions that they see. Calvin being a good example of that. What can we do to reduce test anxiety? We have test taking skills and strategies and an entire chapter of scripted lessons for how to do this. We can teach students how tests are developed. And once people understand that, there are fewer unknowns and fewer fears. Anxiety, in large part, is a fear of the unknown and is anticipatory fear. We teach study skills. All of these are covered in great detail. But there are other specific things we can do. And we have 6 other specific strategies for individual students that you can teach to lessen their test anxiety. We can also involve parents. We have very specific things for parents to do at home. In fact, Strategies for Academic Success provides details on 12 different strategies that you can teach parents to use at home to assist their children in reducing or eliminating test anxiety. Some samples of that: to emphasize actual learning over test scores in discussions with their child, how to find and use practice tests at home, and how to make those practice tests available to their children. Explaining to children, and again, we have great detail on how the parent can do this. Explaining that there are many uses of tests, and many of those are about evaluating the success of the school and the school's program, and not necessarily about the individual student personally. How to discuss test scores with their child in an encouraging manner and not being punitive or judgmental in talking about this with their children. So again, we have a great deal of detail about how parents can do that in 12 different areas. But when it's truly severe and really debilitating to kids, we have other things for you to do as school psychologists, as counselors, as other support staff, using exposure strategies, contingency management, modeling, integrated cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one of the best approaches there is to this. And in some cases, even behaviorally based family therapy, because there's probably also some family contribution to particularly severe or debilitating test anxiety. All of the above are sourced from evidence-based reviews of effectiveness, by the way. When it reaches some point, you might also consider a 504 plan for test-taking accommodations and individual therapy. We can also improve problems in attention and concentration, which enhance all areas of academic learning, but also test-taking. And we have very specific scripted lessons for this as well. We can teach kids to do all of these things to improve their attention and concentration strategies for academic material. So we teach them how to organize their study, their self-management of attention, and we have lots of mnemonics for this as well, how to self-advocate, how to do self-monitoring. So remember that strategy training is essential to learning. It can be directly taught, and it should be explicitly taught. It's transferable across content and across development. It can be taught by teachers, by aides, and parents if you will help parents develop the tools and give them the materials to do this. Strategies for Academic Success is a level A product, meaning anyone can buy it, including parents. So I'm going to stop there and see if, I know Stephanie was nice enough to sort and curate questions that you've been asking, and I bet you've got a lot of those. So I'm glad I was able to save a little bit of time here for Q&A. This is the first time I've done this talk, by the way, so I apologize for any glitches. And some of the stuff here at the end I had to go through a little faster than I wanted, but I think you now understand what you can do and how we can assist you with that. So Stephanie, if you want to let me know what the most burning questions are, I'll see if I can put out the fire.
So some people had asked some questions if there were specific age ranges assigned to some of the strategies, and if there are any that are more helpful for say K-2 or other ages.
We have not assigned those because what we see in the literature is that all of these strategies are helpful at every age. We do emphasize more strongly, though, as just one example, um, listening skills over note taking in elementary students. And we emphasize note taking more with middle school and high school students. So there are, I guess, some differences in emphasis. But, even young kids write things down once they learn to write. So all of these strategies are important. Once children develop any level of fluency in reading, comprehension strategies are critical to improving their ability to take meaning from the words they are fluently calling, for example. So developmentally, we wouldn't teach reading comprehension strategies until a student was able to, in fact, word call. But at that point, we want to begin teaching comprehension strategies. Teaching listening strategies day one. Strategic listening is critical at every developmental level. So I would say there are some things we would emphasize at different levels of development. But the research literature says that all of these are of benefit K through 12.
So what do you think the earliest age you could teach motivation to?
Motivation, I think I can teach most 6-year-olds some of the motivation strategies. I would pick and choose which ones I taught. But I can enhance motivation easily, I think, starting at age 6 by using the materials that we have.
So someone asked, they said, we all have students who refuse to do anything, either their ED or ODD. How will this work to establish this, or by their mere refusal to be motivated enough of an indicator?
Well, the refusal to be motivated is an interesting concept. And that is going to hinge on developing rapport with that student. You can lead a horse to water, right? But you can't make them drink. And the same is true with students. But we have an obligation, and that is probably the very students, the ODD students, and the ones with emotional issues who refuse to engage, where actually teaching them how to be successful is of the greatest benefit, in fact. But I know what you're saying. How do I get them to engage so that I can teach them how to study? That is a very individualized process. And I know this is not the answer you want, but that depends upon your personal clinical skill and your ability to develop rapport with that student and to make yourself relevant. The best way to do that in general is to demonstrate to that student that you care about them, that this is not about you, that you genuinely care about them, and you care about their ability to improve their position in life, to improve their learning, to improve their ability to interact with other people, that you care about how they feel. I didn't have time to review this today, but we have research that clearly demonstrates that the single best motivational factor for anyone to learn or change is to interact with a person they genuinely believe cares about them. And you know that from your own life. You know that you will do things for someone that you believe cares about you that you won't do for other people. And by the way, you notice I didn't say that you care about them. It may be somebody that you don't particularly care a whole lot about, but if you genuinely believe that they care about you, I guarantee you that you will do things for them that you won't do for people that you don't know or don't engage with or don't believe care about you and your best interests. So show them that you care about them. And boy, those kids with ODD and those kids with attachment issues, kids with attachment issues who develop that, they are going to fight you and they're going to push you away. And those are the kids who need you to hang in there the most. And they are the most frustrating for you to do that with. But that's why we need you. That's why we need school psychologists. And it's why we need teachers who genuinely care about the kids. I tell people all the time, the best way in the world to motivate children to achieve in the classroom is to hire teachers who genuinely care about kids. And the same holds true for school psychologists who are working with them. And by the way, that's also consistent with the psychotherapy literature. One of the single best predictors of success in every form of therapy is empathy. So that's probably more than you wanted to hear about that, and may not be the answer you want. But engage with those kids, develop rapport, and make sure, no matter how hard they push you away, that they understand and believe that you care about them.
Okay, so I have a two-part, this is two questions combined as I want to get as much in here as I can, but the cultural relevance for diverse populations, and then also remote learning and the online piece of it, and how do you go about using it that way, and also how do you help someone who's anxious about being in front of the camera in this remote environment?
Well, let's go back to the cultural diversity and relevance of it. One of the things we know, and there's very good literature on this, is that ethnic minorities and low SES are groups that are less likely to develop these skills on their own. There are lots of hypotheses about why, but those are hypotheses. The fact is, they are less likely to develop these skills on their own. So teaching these skills is even more salient for these populations. The cultural relevance, I'm not entirely sure what you're asking about. I can think of lots of different variations of what you might mean by cultural relevance. But in terms of the
I think,
scripted lesson plans,
mhm.
we can make those as culturally relevant as you want. When we say ask about your favorite TV show, well, you'll know your community and your students better than anybody else. You don't have to use that specific example. You can use the scripting and substitute any example that's relevant that you know about to this child's life and the context of that child's life. That's very easy for you to do. So you can enhance that as you go through these scripted lessons. Lots of them call upon you to specify an example. And we give you general examples that you can use. Change them. The example itself is less important than using one. So you can do that in the context of that child's life and that classroom and where that school is located. With kids in virtual environments who are embarrassed to be on camera, for example, well, maybe you don't do this with them in a group environment. Maybe it's one-on-one. And you can screen share a lot of our materials, the reproducible materials that we have in Strategies for Academic Success. You can pull up as a PDF and share that with them and talk them through with it and use your pointer and deal with them that way. And those kids, if they're so anxious about being on camera that they won't engage even when it's one-on-one or in small groups when the whole class is not there, then you've got a different issue of anxiety. And it's probably some form of performance anxiety. Then you're going to need to engage anxiety reduction techniques. I have a whole nother book about that. The BASC 3 Behavioral Intervention Guide has a whole chapter on interventions for anxiety disorders and different types of anxiety. So I'd refer you there for treating that kind of anxiety disorder. Test anxiety, we deal with in Strategies for Academic Success. More general issues of performance anxiety and clinical anxiety outside of that, I'm going to have to refer you to a different source. And my favorite source for that would be the BASC 3 Behavior Intervention.
Okay, so how important is self-awareness throughout the strategies?
Well, you know, one of the things that comes up repeatedly in many of these categories is self-monitoring. And that's how we build self-awareness. We teach kids self-monitoring in many of these categories of strategies. And self-monitoring is important. And as you teach self-monitoring, self-awareness grows. It is a natural outgrowth of self-monitoring. And we have very specific materials for that. For example, in teaching study skills, we have self-monitoring materials that are reproducible that you can show them that they can use to monitor what they're doing. Self-monitoring is a great tool. And as I said, that will lead to enhanced self-awareness. And as part of your self-monitoring, for example, you self-evaluate. You look at what you're doing. You keep track of what you're doing. Self-monitoring, even particularly in certain disability categories, is a wonderful intervention. It's a great intervention, for example, with ADHD. Using cognitive behavior therapy to teach self-monitoring skills is one of the few non-medication interventions for ADHD that is actually really effective. And it enhances self-awareness, which is developing those internal attentional mechanisms. So I hope that made some sense. Stephanie, we're past our 90 minutes by a minute or so. I'm happy to take one more question if you like.
Okay, how does homework fit into the idea of teaching learning strategies in terms of kids who don't already have a routine for doing homework? Has there been work in this area?
Yes, and that is precisely why one of the things we emphasize and that I mentioned multiple times today is teaching study skills and organizational skills. Those are the key to homework. You have to know how to study. You have to know how to engage independently. And in particular, those are things that I would really emphasize in giving parents materials to use to enhance how their children study and how their children organize their materials. And again, these scripted lessons are things that you can use if you interact with these students, that you can also interact with the parents and teach them very easily how to use these lesson plans to reinforce this and to teach their kids how to do this at home. So that's critical to homework. Homework is going to be more critical in remote learning and virtual environments than it is even in the regular academic classroom. And one of the things we know, and there is very good research on this over the last 10 years in particular, is once again that low SES students benefit less from homework. And the reason is that they don't organize their learning environment at home as well, and they don't have the study skills that allow them to benefit from the learning experience that is homework. So I would emphasize that even more with these populations. So I think we're about 4 or 5 minutes past our time. So I think unless there's something you see that you think I absolutely have to address now rather than later, I think I'm going to call it a halt here.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to let everybody know that if your questions were not answered, feel free to send an email to consult@wpspublish.com. The people that are on the screen right now are the assessment consultants, and if you send an email to that address, we will return your email, and the consultant assigned to your area will get back to you as quickly as possible. Also, Dr. Reynolds, is your contact information in one of the slides as well, so that they can go back and refer that to that slide?
I don't remember if it is or not, but if you Google me, I'm easy to find, and I'm on the School Psych Facebook pages. Don't use Messenger to contact me on there though. Post something to me, but it's the best way to get me is email, and my email address is easy to come by. It's on a lot of the handouts, and it's easy to Google.
Okay, and again, I would encourage everyone to go to our content hub. You will see videos, and also go to YouTube, and if you type in YouTube Western Psychological Services, that will take you to, and subscribe, that will take you to a lot of our videos. We also have a link here to our telepractice page, the content hub, which has our videos, and video resources. We have a lot of content on our webpage, so if you want to check that out. There are videos that talk about our online system. There are videos that talk about our assessments, and we would be happy to help you in any way possible if you do send an email to consult@wpspublish.com. Our website is www.wpspublish.com.